Our next guest is calling it like he sees it. Bernie Sanders hacks Hillary for her vote supporting the Iraq War, and this man thinks Hillary Clinton's nothing more than a warmonger. Take a look.
It is clear, however, that if left unchecked, Saddam Hussein will continue to increase his capacity to wage biological and chemical warfare and will keep trying to develop nuclear weapons. Should he succeed in that endeavor, he could alter the political and security landscape of the Middle East, which, as we know all too well, affects American security. This is a very difficult vote. This is probably the hardest decision I've ever had to make. Any vote that might lead to war should be hard, but I cast it with conviction.
Joining me now is former diplomat Jim Jatras. Jim, good to see you.
Hi, Liz. Good to see you.
All right, Jim, let's start out with a couple of things that you've said recently about Hillary Clinton, about her foreign policy. First of all, you say Hillary's not smart enough to be the president. That's pretty harsh, Jim.
It is, but you'd think somebody would learn that you go after Donald Trump on his treatment of women, and he's going to hit you right back with her being an enabler of, frankly, her rapist husband. So then she throws rocks at him on foreign policy, says he's dangerous, he doesn't love NATO, he doesn't love Muslims. But that, I think, is just an invitation for him to shine a light on her record, which has been a record of one failure and one disaster after another, whether we're talking about her Iraq vote, whether her urging her husband to bomb Belgrade in 1999 when she was First Lady, whether we're talking about Libya, Syria. In fact, she didn't even mention Libya in her speech, which should have been an opportunity to display all of her accomplishments, which I think shows that there are no accomplishments there, just a lot of bad performance.
Right, warmongering, like you said. Let's go through some of the things she said in her foreign policy speech. Not only did she call Donald Trump dangerous, like you said, she said that Donald Trump doesn't love NATO enough. Jim, you and I have talked about this. Do you feel that Donald Trump's attitude or his intentions toward NATO would endanger our nation?
No, not at all. I think he's saying that if these countries are going to be allies of ours, and there's a real question as to what they actually supply to the defense of the United States, I would argue they largely supply simply vulnerability, an opportunity to confront the Russians over areas where we really have no national interests. But when we look at the real threats to Europe, the terrorist threat, for example, NATO has been absolutely useless in countering that threat. So the question is, what is in it for America? How does this make Americans safer? And I think this is where you see Donald Trump with a patriotic message. What is good for Americans, not what is good for the globalist elite?
All right, well, to me, it seemed like a lot of pandering from her in that speech. You know, she talked about Donald Trump, which is always a fan favorite, whether you're on the right or the left. She talks about Muslims, knowing, of course, that that's going to resonate with anti-Trump protesters. But in all fairness, what kind of substance did she present in this speech? Because for somebody who's going to be the commander-in-chief of our military, who's going to have the final call on any kind of war or military activity, who's going to have their finger on the nuclear weapons, what kind of substance did she present from her experience?
Almost none. The only thing she really talked about that she touted as her accomplishment was the Iran deal, of all things, which is at best a mixed blessing. The notable omission to me was Libya. This was really her baby. This is the one where she made the call, really, I think, moved President Obama in the direction of intervening in Libya, overthrowing that government, creating a failed state, an opportunity for ISIS, another jihadist group. And then, of course, Benghazi, it goes well beyond the withholding of aid to rescue those 4 Americans that were killed, but really what was going on in Benghazi, the arms pipeline from Libya through Turkey to other jihadists in Syria, for which she needs to take prime responsibility.
So if she's proud of this, and she stated that she is, even if she's stated then afterward, questions about that, why didn't she mention Libya at all?
Because I think she knows it's not a good display of her performance, and so she just skipped right over and just said Trump is bad, Trump is dangerous. I think we need to look at the difference between somebody like Trump, who does have an impulsive side, and somebody like Hillary, who is a cold, calculating frankly, serial killer, in my opinion. When you look at the thousands of Americans that have died in the wars that she supported, she's never met a war she didn't like. We're talking about trillions of dollars down the drain and more terrorism and more chaos in the countries where she's been a voice for war.
Right, so just to put it bluntly then, Libya is an ISIS stronghold now, and you see a correlation directly between Hillary's actions there and the fact that ISIS now resides there?
Absolutely. It's a direct result of the regime change policy of the Obama administration in which she was the driving force. And it makes me really worry if she does get her hands on the nuclear code. As I've written, I think Donald Trump ought to fund a remake of that 1964 Daisy ad that helped win a landslide election for Lyndon Johnson. You know, people forget, and until about 20 or 30 years ago, younger people wouldn't have occasion to know this, it was the Democratic Party that was considered the war party that got us into Korea, got us into Vietnam, and it was Eisenhower that got us out of Korea, Nixon that got us out of Vietnam. And I think it's time to look at the older and sounder traditions of the Republican Party, and that I think Donald Trump can do that.
Right, and you also mentioned, this is very interesting, I want you to talk about this for a minute. You mentioned a link between Hillary's vote for Iraq, her vote for Libya, and now Syria, and you think that that link has to do with Russia. Tell us about that.
I think it does. I think Hillary has this mindset of attitude toward Russia, and I would say to some extent toward China, that they have no legitimate interest. I mean, when you look at the difference between the seriousness with which, say, President Reagan treated his relationship with Gorbachev and the mutual respect and the willingness to make a deal between two great powers, you don't see any of that from Hillary. It's just, you're bad, you need to change your position, and if not, we're going to send B-52s up to your border, we're going to remove your allies from around the world, and you wonder if there's going to be a pushback. Of course there's going to be a pushback, and this is one reason I think that she doesn't really understand the consequences of her very, I would say again, warmongering attitudes.
Right, and that goes back to the very first thing we talked about, that you don't think that she's smart enough to be president. And these things, as good as anything else, demonstrates that. Jim, it was great to talk to you today, as always. Thanks for being here. Up next, 1,037 refugees admitted to the United States this May. Only 2 of them Christian, the rest Muslim. Scott Greer is with me next.